I want to start, kids in the room. I've got a question for you that I would love for you to answer for me. Have you ever been in a fight with someone? Maybe it's maybe a disagreement, maybe an argument, maybe with a sibling, maybe a friend, a parent, a fight, a disagreement, an argument that you just couldn't let go. Looking at some of my kids, have you ever experienced something like this? Any of my kids willing to share some time where you were in an argument or a fight with somebody that you just couldn't let go? You had to hang on. You had to win. Harmony's like sitting on the front of her seat. I could tell. Harmony, what do you got for us? Okay, very important fight. Harmony and her friends were fighting over what the name Nemo means. How to pronounce it. Oh, Nemo. Or you said, or Mimo. Okay, yes. Sometimes you gotta fight that one out. Carson. Oh, this one didn't last very long because he won it. Okay. Oh, you asked Alexa. Alexa helps solve all. How many fewer fights would we in if we just let Alexa help us win these? But a second, how do you pronounce a word fight? Okay, Jasmine. I love that we're locked in on these, like, how things are pronounced, but this is very important for us, right? Yes, thank you. Each of you, great stories. I wonder about the rest of the room, the bigger children in here. Maybe it wasn't a fight with a person, but what are some of the things that you have just struggled to let go of? Maybe it's a question. A nagging question that you just can't shake, can't stop asking. Maybe it's grief that you can't seem to get rid of. Maybe it's betrayal that you just can't seem to move past. Maybe it's an addiction that you just can't seem to get free of. A doubt that haunts you. Is there something that you've been fighting with for months, maybe years? Genesis 32 tells one of the strangest stories in the Bible. One of the most mysterious stories in the Bible. A man spends an entire night wrestling with a mysterious stranger in the dark. I will just tell you up front that I cannot read this story without thinking of one of my oldest friends who was a wrestler in high school, who we became roommates in college, Claudia's son, who loved wrestling so much that once he was no longer a wrestler in high school, still wanted to wrestle all of us all the time. And so we found ourselves wrestling way more than we wanted to. My other roommate taught me that there are ways of dealing with people who want to wrestle you when you don't want to wrestle. Tyler, my other roommate, would just go limp. And it turns out that that's no longer fun for the person who's trying to wrestle you. I learned this strategy, and the rest of freshman year was much better. Jacob doesn't do that in our story. But I often picture, what if this man started wrestling him and he just went limp and the story was over? That would have been a different story. The man in this story is injured in this fight, but he refuses to let go until he receives this blessing that he's asking for, that he's demanding. And by the time the sun comes up in the morning, he is limping for the rest of his life. And it's not yet clear from this story whether he is different at all. This story has confused readers for thousands of years, and it might be one of the most honest pictures in all of Scripture of like what it means to be human. Before we can make sense of this wrestling match, we have to just notice that this small story falls within this larger story of Jacob being reunited with his brother. And so we need to see what Jacob is carrying with him. It's been 20 years since Jacob ran for his life under the cover of darkness. See, 20 years earlier, the story that we heard last year, Jacob deceived his father. 20 years earlier, he tricked his brother Esau out of his birthright. 20 years earlier, he stole his brother's blessing out from under his nose. And Jacob, 20 years earlier, repeatedly hurt his family. And so his brother, Esau, is angry and has made a plan to kill Jacob, a plan that spreads so that people know, so that Jacob finds out and runs. And Jacob, he flees, and he spends 20 years living far off, away from his family, the land that he knows, with his uncle Laban. But there, God showed up to Jacob, and after many years, God says it's time to go back. It's time to return home. But God says, I will be with you. And chapter 32 that we just heard from Jasmine and Jen has Jacob on the road back home, preparing to encounter Esau for the first time in 20 years. And it's worth just considering for a second. What has been in your life the scariest confrontation that you have ever had? That person that you did not want to see again, that you felt like you couldn't see again, that person who, if you saw them face to face, you were afraid of what you might do, of what they might do. This is hanging in the air. And Jacob sends messengers ahead. And the impression is that he sends them to Esau's home with gifts because Esau wants to soften Esau's heart, his disposition. But the messengers come racing back a bit shaken because Esau isn't at home. Esau has heard that Jacob is on his way, and Esau is already on his way out to meet Jacob. And I appreciate what Jen did as she read 400 men are with him. That's a lot of men who are coming out to meet Jacob with his brother who 20 years ago was ready to murder him. 40 is kind of like army numbers. And we read in Genesis 32, verse 7, Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. This word that Esau's already on his way, that there are 400 men, has him scared. And immediately, Jacob begins to Jacob. He begins to strategize. He divides his people and his animal into two different camps. This way, if Esau attacks one of the camps, the other one is going to have time to escape and to survive. Jacob is afraid of his brother. And so he immediately goes into self-protection mode as he protects himself and his family. But we also see something in Jacob that we haven't really seen from Jacob's father, Isaac, or his grandfather, Abraham. So while Jacob is busy making all of these arrangements to protect himself and to protect his life, he also does something beautiful, something that's a little bit surprising if you've been reading the story along. He prays. He prays, and we hear this beautiful cry out to God when he says, oh, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, oh, Yahweh, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred that I may do you good, right? He's reminding God, you're the one who told me to come back here. This was you. You said this, and I'm going. For with only my staff, I crossed this Jordan. He's remembering back to 20 years ago when he had nothing. And now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. Jacob takes his fear directly to God, and he names it honestly. And what we see in Jacob is something very different than we saw in Jacob last week. At this point, Jacob knows Yahweh personally and has in him the instinct to turn and to pray. Yahweh has spoken to him, and Jacob has obeyed. And Jacob remembers that over these 20 years, he went from nothing more than a stick in his hand, to now these 2 full camps full of family and servants and wealth, and all of this by God's hand. And Jacob, in this moment, he just admits, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. And if you think about why he is afraid because he knows what he has done. He knows what he did to his brother Esau all those years ago. And so Jacob is convinced that he will die unless God intervenes. It's this beautiful moment of humble submission and acknowledgement that he needs God. And then, in like the most human way possible, Jacob, after finishing his prayer, then starts to come up with his own plan, right? Like he prays, he starts to strategize, he prays, and then he unleashes the rest of his own plan. And this just feels so much like what we do. Like we're busy making sure that we're gonna be fine, but also like we know, all right, God, you're the one who's got us, and so God, would you deliver us? But then also, just in case you don't, I'm gonna keep doing this stuff. And so it's a beautiful prayer and a beautiful backup plan. Jacob, after praying, is convinced he's still in danger. Unsure of God's help. Jacob does what he knows how to do. He bribes his brother. Right? I mean, he sends waves of stuff, of gifts ahead to soften his brother. And if we think about Jacob, his entire life, exchanging his a birthright for a bowl, of stew, like he has been bribing his brother since the very beginning. And so this is what he does. He sends gifts to soften him, and then he sends his family ahead. And he stays behind on the other side of the river. And you can't help but wonder if Jacob has just put himself in the safest possible place. The place where if Esau does decide to come after him, he's got a lot of obstacles in front of him, and Jacob has an easy escape. Esau would have to fight and kill a lot of people before finally getting to Jacob. But here, Jacob is all alone. With everything he's done, with everything he's afraid of, everything that could happen. And this is the moment when a strange man appears. A man that grabs Jacob in the dark. No introduction, no warning, and they wrestle throughout the night. And neither one wins. When the stranger sees that he can't overpower Jacob, we're told that he touches Jacob's hip and throws it out of socket. Jacob is injured, but he doesn't let go. Jacob is injured, but he still doesn't let go. This feels like the perfect description of Jacob's entire relational life. Right? I mean, he comes out of the womb clinging to his brother. From the earliest days, there is this rivalry between them. They are brothers, but from early on, their relationship is fractured. Their relationship is injured, but Jacob doesn't let go. Jacob spends his life grasping for a blessing. Jacob's grasping, it injures the relationship between his parents, as his parents take on favorite children. Jacob's grasping injures the relationship between him and his father, between his mother and his brother, and ultimately Jacob's relationships are all deeply injured. And yet Jacob never lets go. The stranger says to Jacob, "Let me go, for the day has broken. It is time to be done," says the man. Let go. But now Jacob makes the same demand that he has been making since he was a child. He needs the blessing. He will get the blessing. And so he hangs on as though his life, as though the blessing depends on it. And he says, "I will not let go unless you bless me." I wonder how that sits with you. People reading this often sort of say something doesn't feel quite right about this demand that Jacob makes. Right? Like it doesn't sit right in our spirits. Like there's something about this that's off. And yet, throughout history, Christians have tried to make sense of it. I've read all kinds of devotional reflections on this passage, some of them encouraging us to see Jacob as like a model of faith. So some have heard in this story a call to prayer, a kind of prayer that's like a wrestling with God, a prayer that doesn't give up, that doesn't give in until God gives us what we want. Some have seen in Jacob wrestling Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? They see Jesus wrestling with the Father, asking for another way. And let me just say, right, Jesus absolutely does teach us to pray passionately without giving up, to ask and ask and ask until God gives. And Jesus does struggle with God in the garden intensely. But we are told to pray this way. Not for what we want, but for what God wants. Your kingdom come, your will be done. And Jesus also yields, praying, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus gives up his idea of an easier path. He submits to the Father, knowing that the Father's path is going to lead to his death. Jesus isn't busy protecting himself. And so Jacob is not like Jesus at all in this wrestling. But there are two things that are going to happen next in the story that help us see what all of this wrestling is about. First, Jacob is given a new name. He is named Israel. And this is the name, this name appears for the first time in the story. And second, Jacob names this place where he's been wrestling with this man God's face. He just names the place God's face. Lots of naming going on here. And it's not immediately obvious what it means, except Jacob tells us why he calls the place Peniel, or God's face. Genesis 32:30, Jacob says, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been delivered." Are you guys surprised by that line? Like as you're reading, like where did Jacob see God's face? When? How? We've literally only seen Jacob and some strange man wrestling all night. Where is this like whole face-to-face encounter with God? Well, right before Jacob named this place God's face, Jacob asks the man for his name. And if you ask me, this is a pretty straightforward question, right? What is your name? I don't know. Like, wouldn't you want to know the name of the man that you spent the whole night wrestling with? I mean, like, this is often the first thing we do when we meet a stranger is we go, "Hi, who are you? What is your name?" But this man gives what often strikes people as like a cryptic, mysterious response. He says, "Why is it that you ask me my name?" And people see like mystery here. Like, oh, the man is being vague on purpose. Or, like, what if he's literally just confused as to why Jacob is asking? Like, what if the man is like, "I just told you who I am. You know who I am." Because just before this, the man gave Jacob a new name. And that name, Israel, means God wrestles. The name Jacob tells the story of Jacob's life from Jacob's perspective. Jacob grabs, Jacob tricks, Jacob takes, Jacob's, right? Jacob's entire life has been defined by his actions, his Jacobing, or at least it appears to be. And so in a sense, in this moment where Jacob is about to come face to face with the brother he deceived and cheated, Jacob is absolutely sure that he is going to face the consequences of his Jacobing. But as the morning breaks, Jacob is given a new name, a new definition. Jacob's life will no longer be seen as the story, as Jacob's story, but as the story of Jacob wrestling, but the story of God wrestling. Because God has wrestled for Jacob. And God, because of who Jacob is, will wrestle with Jacob. And that's what we have seen the whole way through. This new name is like putting on a new set of glasses, and you reread Jacob's story and you will see that there is a second story unfolding. The story of God wrestling for Jacob and wrestling with him. And this is often the way that our own lives go. We often live as though our perspective, our experiences define everything, help us make sense of what has happened to us. But something happens when God, by his Holy Spirit, gives us eyes to see where God has been at work in our lives from the very beginning. And we no longer see our lives as just a series of actions that we have engaged in, but we begin to see our actions in light of God's presence with us from the very beginning. We discover that our lives are not the product of all of the things that we have done, all of the decisions we have made, the choices we have made, but our lives have often been guided and directed by the God who wrestles. That God has often been wrestling for us. And I wonder for each of us how often we have made God wrestle with us. The man tells Jacob that he's spent the night wrestling with God. The man whose face he has seen all night long, the face that he has looked at all night is God's face. And if this is true, Jacob realizes this is truly a miracle because somehow Jacob has survived. And at least in part, this is part of the good news, that God will wrestle with us if we make him. But God's goal is not to kill us in our wrestling. God's goal is to help us see that he is the one who wrestles not only with us, but for us. Jacob has survived. He is alive. And here's the thing, Jacob walks away from this encounter with two things. He walks away with both a wound and a blessing. The thing is, the blessing was always in the cards. The blessing was always God's plan. God planned to bless Jacob. God announced he was going to bless Jacob. This is what God intended to do. Jacob didn't need to wrestle for it. We often do not need to wrestle for the things that God has already promised us. But if Jacob was going to wrestle, there was no way he was walking away without a limp. The blessing and the wound are both signs of God's presence in Jacob's life. Jacob's life also carries another blessing and another wound by the time this is all over. The author of Genesis wants to make it clear that there are two stories unfolding side by side. There is a story about Jacob and his relationships with humans, and there is a story about Jacob and his relationship with God. That Jacob doesn't get to have a relationship with God apart from his relationships with his brother, with his siblings. Both are involved. The one informs the other, and the other informs the first. Jacob doesn't just want a blessing from God. Jacob actually also in this story wants a blessing from his brother Esau. Now, the blessing that he wants from Esau isn't much at this point. Like, he just wants to not be murdered. Low bar, right? I mean, I think most of us sort of live with that general desire to not be murdered by our neighbors. Okay? Small ask. But Jacob is busy putting together an elaborate plan to deliver himself from Esau, to get that blessing from Esau, right? He sees an opportunity to get this small blessing of life from his brother by giving his brother enough stuff. But in the chapter that will follow, in chapter 33, we will learn that the blessing that Jacob is busy trying to buy from his brother, it actually doesn't compare to the blessing that Esau already has in store for his brother. Because at this point, we're imagining, if we're with Jacob, we're reading the story, yeah, Esau hates his brother. Esau's lost everything to his brother. Esau's just been waiting for 20 years, bitter and resentful, and he's ready to get back at him, and he hears his brother is coming, and he's got 400 men, and they're coming. And if you don't know the end of the story, you're just like, yeah, Jacob better protect. God, you better intervene. Genesis 33:4 says, Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. That's not where that story was supposed to go. The murderous Esau over 20 years has become the loving older brother. What? Esau's not angry anymore. God has made him a man of peace. Because of the deep wounds between Jacob and Esau, Jacob thought that he needed to buy his brother off. He thought peace would be difficult. Jacob reveals that he has deep wounds still. He can't imagine that his brother has forgiven him. Jacob knows what he is carrying around. He knows the resentment he feels toward his uncle who's just cheated him again and again. Jacob's injuries, his limps, are keeping him from imagining that Esau could possibly be a healthy, whole man of peace. But notice what Jacob says to Esau. He says, I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God. He just saw the face of God. And he says, and you have accepted me. He sees Esau's face the way that he saw God's face. He's been wrestling with both. The author is purposely tying these stories together with this theme of faces. At the center of these stories is both a wound and a blessing, right? When we seek a blessing on our own terms, we can't help but be wounded. And so it leaves us asking the question, what is it that we are seeking? What is it that we are chasing after? What is it that we are clinging to? Who is it then that we are hurting along the way? And in what ways are we hurting ourselves in our pursuit of this stuff? And what does it mean for us that God himself came, took on human flesh, and was wounded for us and by us? He was wounded for us so we would stop chasing the blessings that have been promised and given. He was wounded for us so that we would stop wounding each other. Before we made any effort toward him, he gave everything for us. He is the one who reminds us of that this morning, that he has offered us everything, including his very life. And today, he invites us to be part of his family, to gather around his table, to be made right with him and to be made right with each other.